I think what's really bugging me about the Sydney Sweeney GQ interview is the tendency that a lot of us white people have to act like we don't know what's going on. Like, I don't really see the issue with it. It's just jeans. I don't know what people are talking about. It would actually be so easy and simple to say, yeah, I heard the feedback. That was not my intention. That's not what I meant at all. Sorry about that. Rather than to go the route of gaslighting. Like,
I remember when we first started seeing Sydney Sweeney on our television screens and thinking that we were seeing not only like an interesting, cool, talented actress, but like a tastemaker, because she was in these big projects like The White Lotus and Euphoria and The Handmaid's Tale. And it felt like, okay, like we're seeing the rise of an actor who seems to be really thoughtful and intentional about the types of projects that they're involved in. And after season 1 of Euphoria, you're kind of like, oh my God, this girl is like on top of the world. Like all of these ladies are. Every single woman in that show felt like they had the world at their fingertips. Like they could do anything post Euphoria.
As a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl who comes from an extremely Christian conservative family, I don't like to assume other people's politics because I'm very different from my family. I am the black sheep, I am the leftist, I'm the socialist, I'm the devil, right? So when it comes to Sydney Sweeney, it's like everybody knows she comes from this super conservative family out in Idaho, and for the longest time, I think a lot of people were like, oh, just because her family's conservative doesn't mean that she is. She can have different views, and it's like, yeah, she absolutely can.
I'm maybe one of a dozen people who saw Christy in theaters, and a core issue with the movie is that Sydney Sweeney is not a transformative actor. After an abysmal press tour in which she couldn't even bring herself to speak out against white supremacy following backlash against American Eagle jeans ads that prized her beauty, blonde hair, and blue eyes.
Honestly, I'm not really surprised at the idea of like an American company corporation having sort of like white supremacist undertones, like this whole American Eagle thing. I'm more of confused as to what the hell Sydney Sweeney's looking for in her career. Because after she blew up from Euphoria, she started getting all these big movie roles, and she had Anyone But You or whatever that movie was called that actually got pretty popular. And it looked like she was going to maybe become like a rom-com queen, but then she also started doing horror movies, and she's kind of expressed she wants to be more than just sexualized. So I'm thinking, okay, she seems like she may be like one of the first Gen Z, or ultimately, I don't know how old she is, but I think she's Gen Z, people that's gonna maybe become like an A-list actress. Like she seems to really have hunger to be an actress. But this girl does anything for a check. Anything for a check.
There's a moment in every star's trajectory where the publicity machine stops protecting them and starts feeding on them. For Sydney Sweeney, that moment wasn't a secret leaked from a dark corner of the internet. It was a jeans ad broadcast to the world. And the public response became a lesson in what happens when the unspoken rules of white privilege are suddenly and loudly spoken aloud.
As a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl who comes from an extremely Christian conservative family, I don't like to assume other people's politics because I'm very different from my family. I am the black sheep, I am the leftist, I'm the socialist, I'm the devil, right? So when it comes to Sydney Sweeney, it's like everybody knows she comes from this super conservative family out in Idaho, and for the longest time, I think a lot of people were like, oh, just because her family's conservative doesn't mean that she is. She can have different views, and it's like, yeah, she absolutely can, right? But the GQ interview pretty much answered that question for us, right? Because if someone's interviewing you and they're like, which, by the way, really terrible interview, GQ, I don't know if that's like someone who works on your team all the time, it's probably time to move on from them or train them better. Really, really poor interview. Really, really poor interviewing skills as well. The questions were not enough for me. They did not push the answers enough for me. If you're going to have everybody pay all that time and money for an interview like that, get somebody better to do the job. That's my first note. The second thing I'm going to say is that if I'm being interviewed as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl with a family that is known for this, right? And someone's saying, oh, it seems that there's messages of white supremacy coming across. If I don't believe in that and I know that that's wrong, the first thing I'm doing is being like, and I actively reject that. I had no idea. I'm horrified. I asked them to pull the ad. Like my response would be very different than just like, yeah, the ad speaks for itself. When I want to say something about something, I'll address it. Like she might as well have just said, yeah, I'm fucking MAGA racist and I don't give a fuck. And I do love my jeans and I do think I'm prettier and better than everyone else on this. Like might as well have her smug little look on her face. And I'm going to say this confidently because I grew up with people like this around me my whole entire life. And people still feel very comfortable acting like that around me because of the way I look, right? A lot of people assume that I am very conservative, and I've heard crazy fucking shit said around me my entire life because of it. So yeah, all I'm going to say is it's very, very obvious from that interview where she stands on things. That girl doesn't give a fuck. So I don't know. It's very easy to not support an actress like that when you know that she can't even reject views like that. Really disappointing to see white women in power in those spaces not speaking up, not rejecting racism. Just, yeah, really disappointed overall with the whole entire thing.
No, because as someone who works in corporate, I know there is a Black woman right now at American Eagle thinking, I told you so. I've worked in corporate for over 10 years, and I know that Sydney Sweeney ad could have been prevented. And here's how I know. One time I was in a meeting with a bunch of executives, all old white men, and they were trying to figure out how to invite a Black woman onto their board. She lived in Chicago, and we happened to have another woman on the board who also lived in Chicago. But they didn't know if these Black women knew each other. They just knew they were both Black women from Chicago. They wanted to make the connection, but they were a little unsure because they didn't know if that would be insensitive. So someone turned to me and said, Nichelle, do you think this would be a little insensitive? We don't know if these Black women know each other. We just know they're two Black women who happen to live in Chicago. And before I could even get the chance to answer, one of the executives piped up, a white man, and said, no, I don't think that'll be an issue at all. I think that is totally fine. Let's do it. And everybody in the room moved on. They never talked about it again. They didn't ask for my opinion, and I didn't give it. Every time something like this Sydney Sweeney ad happens, people are like, how could this go through so many channels? So many people had to approve this. This is crazy. But I've been in the room before. You'll be shocked how many times bad ideas get pushed through because nobody wants to listen to the people that they hired to actually help them create these things. They don't want to listen to women. They don't want to listen to Black women. And then things like this happen and they're dealing with PR crises. And people like me just sit back and go, well, if y'all had listened to me, none of this would have happened.
To understand the backlash, you have to understand the brand. Sydney Sweeney wasn't just an actress. She was an archetype. She was carefully constructed as the embodiment of a specific, palatable, and highly profitable form of white femininity. The girl next door with a dangerous edge, the blonde bombshell, who could also cry on cue. She benefited from a system, white supremacy, that has always reserved its highest pedestal for women who look like her. This isn't speculation. It's the bedrock of Hollywood history. She didn't have to actively be racist to benefit from this. The machinery was built for her success. I remember watching her rise and thinking of a conversation with a Black actress friend who lamented the roles she was never even considered for. The ingenue, the uncomplicated romantic lead, roles that seemed to have Sydney's name pre-attached. Sydney's team, and by extension Sydney herself, understood this currency. They traded on it. Every campaign, every role was a transaction within this system. She knew what she signed up for, a seat at the table in a room others weren't even allowed to enter.
I think what's really bugging me about the Sydney Sweeney GQ interview is the tendency that a lot of us white people have to act like we don't know what's going on. Like, I don't really see the issue with it. It's just jeans. I don't know what people are talking about. It would actually be so easy and simple to say, yeah, I heard the feedback. That was not my intention. That's not what I meant at all. Sorry about that. Rather than to go the route of gaslighting. Like, that's so, like, on the nose white woman. But I also don't want to do that thing where I say white woman and then it just feels like misogyny. No, it's a thing that white people do in general, where we pretend like we don't know what's going on. Like, we don't know what all of the people of color around us are saying and picking up on and just acting like, I don't see it, so I guess it's not happening. You're crazy, actually. It also really bugs me that Sydney Sweeney is trying to present herself as an artist who is putting a lot of thought into her work and yet has nothing to say about systems of power. When asked what it felt like when the president tweeted on his fucking social media about her jeans ad, how did it feel to have that person in that position of power? How did it feel to have their support? And she said it felt surreal. And that's it? That's where you're gonna stop? And this plausible deniability thing that you want to try to claim by just saying it was surreal, which could kind of go either way technically, but it doesn't feel that way because you're choosing to be neutral on a very not neutral situation. I say this to direct this at other white people who feel inclined to say things like, I just don't know what they're talking about. I don't see it. I just don't understand. Well, maybe try to. Maybe give an effort. Because there's really only two options that are happening here. One, you're just not even trying to get it. You're not even trying to undergo the process of understanding what people are saying. Or two, you are intentionally gaslighting all of the people of color around you when they raise concerns, when something feels a little off. And both of those options are two different kinds of bad, but both bad.
Sid the Sloth strikes again by proving just how much of a simpleton she really is. Sydney Sweeney sat down with GQ and discussed the backlash from the jeans ad with American Eagle. When the interviewer asked her was she surprised by the reaction, she responded with, I did a jeans ad. I love jeans. All I wear are jeans. I'm literally in jeans and a t-shirt right now. I don't think that soft spot of hers has healed properly, because Little Miss Butt-Her-Face couldn't have sounded more tone-deaf and insensitive, to say the least. When asked about how the advertisement spread the notion that palm-colored people people are more superior, she stated that when she has an issue that she wants to speak about, people will hear. Excuse me, B-word? This was her opportunity to prove that she's not a racist, and instead, she says nothing. I wonder how much Jeff Bezos is paying for her breastfeeding services, allegedly. She has certainly gotten herself wrapped up with the wrong people. Oftentimes, being on the right side of history can come with a pay cut, so perhaps her silence is more profitable than her activism. I completely understand why Zendaya reportedly doesn't want to do any press with her, and her smug Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada attitude. Who does little Miss Smoothbrain think she is? Somebody please take this hillbilly bathwater saleswoman off the map. I'm sick of her. We truly make the wrong people rich and famous. You're welcome, I love ya.
The American Eagle ad was the spark, but the tinder was decades of racialized double standards. The ad presented ripped jeans and a casual midriff as symbols of carefree, youthful rebellion. But for Black and brown communities, the response was a collective, painful gasp of recognition. The same aesthetic that marked their children as thugs and delinquents, violating decency codes, was being celebrated and sold for profit on a white body. This was the system's hypocrisy laid bare. The backlash wasn't just about the ad. It was a referendum on the very privileged Sydney represented. She and her team, operating within their bubble, had failed to anticipate that the world outside was no longer willing to accept this dynamic without comment. They expected the profits of whiteness without the accountability. The public, however, delivered an invoice, and the price was her pristine public image.
I remember when we first started seeing Sydney Sweeney on our television screens and thinking that we were seeing not only like an interesting, cool, talented actress, but like a tastemaker, because she was in these big projects like The White Lotus and Euphoria and The Handmaid's Tale. And it felt like, okay, like we're seeing the rise of an actor who seems to be really thoughtful and intentional about the types of projects that they're involved in. And after season 1 of Euphoria, you're kind of like, oh my God, this girl is like on top of the world. Like all of these ladies are. Every single woman in that show felt like they had the world at their fingertips. Like they could do anything post Euphoria. And around that time, the photo shoots that Sydney Sweeney was doing were interesting. The brands she was aligning herself with were interesting. And then I distinctly remember a shift, or like when the Laneige and like Tory Burch content started dropping, I just was like, like that doesn't really seem like something you need to do if you're on Euphoria. Like it feels like you could go anywhere and you're going to Laneige and Tory Burch. Like interesting. And around that time, she released this weird set of quotes that was like, I have a family to support, sort of implying that that's why she's doing all of these brand deals, even though she was at that time in like the biggest TV show on earth. And then of course we started to see the MAGA adjacent birthday party that she was attending for her mom. And then the really weird vibes that she was projecting during Anyone But You press tour with Glenn Powell, who was engaged and she was also engaged, but they were both acting like they were seeing each other behind the scenes, like on purpose seemingly for the promotion of the movie. And Anyone But You in general was also like a complete tonal shift for her, where I was like, oh, like we've crossed over. You are now trying to be this type of actress, and I thought you were at one point trying to be another type of actress. And like she's the only person from Euphoria who has done this. Even Zendaya, when she crosses over into like blockbuster roles, she's not doing Anyone But You type movies. Like she's still having a high level of discernment with like the art that she creates and the projects that she's involved in. And the same can be said for the types of brand partnerships that Zendaya does. Like she's doing Smart Water, Sydney Sweeney's doing Buy. You know, like there's just a difference. And then with the bathwater stuff, like selling her own bathwater, and every single ad in that campaign was so strange. Now with the whole eugenics American Eagle campaign, it's just like, let's wrap it up. Let's stop giving attention to Sydney Sweeney. Like she's deeply uncool. Really, it was curtains when she was at the Bezos wedding, kind of looking very proud of herself as she stepped onto the gondola in Venice, like as if she was at a royal wedding. Like it just is very deeply greedy and corny and capitalism aligned. I guess I made the mistake of thinking that someone who is talented and involved in cool, thought-provoking media sometimes is like a cool, thought-provoking person themselves, which is just not the case. And I think I maybe gave her a little bit too much credit when she first came on the scene, and now she's really showing us who she is. And I think we should all just collectively start to ignore.
The girl doesn't care. And she doesn't care during a time where racism is rampant in America. ICE is snatching brown kids off the street. And she's like, when I want to make a statement, I will. Girl, please, just say you do not align with racism, you're not racist, you love everyone. Done. She's also dating Scooter Braun, and that is also a choice. Ooh. But instead she says, I don't want to talk about it. Huh? You gotta talk about it. And one of the things that I like about Gap and how they did it better, the commercial that they did, they had women of all different shapes and sizes dancing and looking hot. And they also supported a black woman when they did this campaign, because that song is my song. And I wrote that song about being single and celebrating me being in my own power. And that's another way that Sydney really kind of dropped the ball with her commercial. She's laying on the ground writhing for the male gaze. Like, we don't do that anymore. This is about loving ourselves. This is about having fun with our girls. This is about uplifting other women, not trying to look helpless for a man. That's not it. I think she realizes that things are changing now. People don't want to align with brands that are racist. People don't want to give their money to people who do not stand up for black rights, gay rights, trans rights, like rights for everyone. The girl doesn't care. Like, if someone said that to me, if someone was accusing me of being like a black supremacist, I would be like, no, all people are equal. I do not believe that black people are superior over white people. That wasn't hard. Sydney Sweeney is not naive. She could have easily just said, you know what, I saw the controversy. That's not what I intended when I took part in this commercial. And I do not stand with anything that is racist. I believe that all people are equal. Easy. No PR guidance needed there. But instead she said she'll make a statement when she wants to.
In Hollywood, perception is reality, and the first sign of trouble is often silence. The most deafening silence came from Zendaya. When reports surfaced that Zendaya, a powerhouse in her own right and a vocal advocate for racial justice, had refused to do joint press for their rumored project, it sent a seismic shock through the industry. This wasn't just a co-star dispute, it was a profound social signal. Zendaya's brand is built on conscious, deliberate choices. Aligning herself with Sydney, now a symbol of racial tone-deafness, would have been brand suicide. This move, more than any negative tweet, legitimized the backlash. It told studios that Sydney was now a liability, not just to box office numbers, but to the social capital of her peers. Other co-stars grew distant. Brand deals, once a steady stream, dried up almost overnight. The industry that built her began to disown her to protect itself.
Do I want to talk about Sydney Sweeney and American Eagle's ad campaign that's straight out of the Goebbels playbook? Not really. Will I? Yes, because I'm actually a World War II historian, and this is straight up eugenics. Take a listen.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color.
That annoying baby voice aside, she is complicit, and American Eagle knew exactly what they're doing because this had to go through I don't know how many rounds of approval. Showing a woman who's quote-unquote the ideal beauty standard. This was also common in 1930s Germany propaganda films. They're very easy to find. And quite honestly, this is not only irresponsible, it's incredibly disturbing. What's next? Reinstituting the Lebensborn program since birth rates are declining, where, the government actually took women who met the ideal body standard and had them reproduce, willingly or unwillingly, with SS officers. Yeah, those were the male ideals of the Yahtzee regime. So, is that going to be next American Eagle?
Honestly, I'm not really surprised at the idea of like an American company corporation having sort of like white supremacist undertones, like this whole American Eagle thing. I'm more confused as to what the hell Sydney Sweeney's looking for in her career. Because after she blew up from Euphoria, she started getting all these big movie roles, and she had Anyone But You, or whatever that movie was called, that actually got pretty popular. And they looked like she was going to maybe become like a rom-com queen, but then she also started doing horror movies, and she's kind of expressed she wants to be more desexualized. So I'm thinking, okay, she seems like she may be like one of the first Gen Z, or ultimately, I don't know how old she is, I think she's Gen Z, people that's going to maybe become like an A-list actress. Like, she seems to really have hunger to be an actress. But this girl does anything for a check. Anything for a check. Anytime I turn on a TV, scroll on TikTok, whatever, I see ads for her for the most random fucking shit. It'll be like, hey, try this double berry pop bubblegum. And you're kind of just like, what are you doing advertising fucking bubblegum? Like, that's just not what an aspiring A-list actress would sort of advertise. What are you doing? I mean, generic clean things like advertising water and this and that, like, that's fine. But like, hey dudes and all these, like, it's just like, what are you doing? These are, you can't just take any check, please. And this whole, like, American Eagle thing, even though I think American Eagle is getting what they wanted through this ad, which is, like, the conversation, and I think they did want to kind of cultivate a hardcore fan base, and they know that MAG likes to stick it to the lib, so a large portion of MAG is going to go out and now buy American Eagle because of this controversy. Sydney Sweeney has nothing to benefit from this. Being the poster child for white supremacy and MAGA is not a good thing for your actual career as an actress. So I just, like, don't know what her goal is with her career, because it's just not making any sense. Someone on her team should have been like, yo, this ad's not good for your brand. It may be good for American Eagle because they have you doing some fucked up shit, but this isn't good for your brand as Sydney Sweeney, because if you're a controversial figure, you're not going to be booking those A-list movie roles. Even if MAGA loves you down and defends you 10 toes down on fucking Twitter and all the other shit, no large movie director is going to be booking someone who is controversial. What are you doing, Sydney? reel it in. Stop the ads. This bullshit's like, it's just not working for you. Just do the fucking acting and call it a day. This is like, it's getting weird with these ads. The Mr. Squash, like Sydney's bathwater, and this is like, what are you're just cheapening your brand so fucking, like you're not A-list. You're never gonna be A-list with the way that you're handling your career. Not every dollar is worth that dollar long term. You're shortening your career exponentially. I just don't know what you're doing.
The final, undeniable nail in the coffin was the box office performance of Aurora's Echo and The Last Summer. Both films, which had been banking on Sydney's star power, opened to disastrous numbers. The reviews were mixed, but the audience scores were catastrophic. Studio exit polls and social listening data revealed a chilling pattern. A massive boycott by the crucial 18 to 35 demographic, particularly among Black, brown, and socially conscious white viewers. The algorithm, which once amplified her fame, now amplified her infamy. Her name had become culturally toxic, synonymous with controversy rather than quality entertainment. The studios, who are ultimately agnostic to morality but devout worshippers of profit, saw the data and made their calculation. The millions invested in her were now a sunk cost. The phone, which once rang off the hook, was now terrifyingly silent. Her career wasn't just damaged. It was, for the foreseeable future, untenable.
I'm maybe one of a dozen people who saw Christy in theaters, and a core issue with the movie is that Sydney Sweeney is not a transformative actor. After an abysmal press tour in which she couldn't even bring herself to speak out against white supremacy following backlash against American Eagle jeans ads that prized her beauty, blonde hair, and blue eyes, and Christy Sweeney is, lightly disguised with brown contact lenses, moppy brown hair, 30 pounds of muscle, but never once does it feel like she's breaking some kind of mold that she set for herself. And frankly, part of that is in the writing of the film itself. Christy is a biopic about Christy Martin, who pioneered the women's boxing industry and became the most renowned boxer in the world who's a woman. But the film rarely gives space for Christy's internal world to tell us much about her, which amplifies that it just feels like we're watching a semi-buff Sydney Sweeney rise up the ranks of boxing. And, she's not bad. She has some strong moments, but especially when I look at her co-star, Ben Foster, who gives a truly transformative, disgusting performance as Jim Martin, Christy's trainer and husband, Sweeney is outclassed in both commitment and performance. Jim Martin, the character, is immediately an uneasy presence, quickly manipulating Christy into marrying him through negging her and threatening her with the knowledge that she's a lesbian. And then once she agrees to marry him, it's devastating to see how tight his grip on her is. As Jim becomes more abusive, it's even more painful to watch the way that Christy's mother, played by a completely underutilized Mara Weaver, was okay with her daughter being married to an abusive man more than twice her age, and was far more shameful of the idea that Christy could be a lesbian. Watching Christy rise the ranks of the boxing world feels like Wikipedia biopic paint-by-number stuff, but it's watching Christy try to manage the abuse that she experiences with Jim until it comes to a terrifying, violent climax that feels like the real story. And it's the only time where I forgot I was watching Sydney Sweeney and remembered that this happened to a real person. The actual sports biography of the story might be great if you're a diehard boxing fan and remember some of these moments, but for the film we barely get to see much of Christy's internal life. What makes her such a strong fighter? Is it rage? Is it something to prove? Is it narcissism? I think the reason you make a biopic is because you're trying to put the human touch on someone's list of accomplishments, but I never feel like the movie fully forms who Christy is until she gets abused, which again makes the actual sports biography piece of the film just feel like pretext for what the real meat of the story is, which is how Christy was able to escape her abuser. And so that contributes to Sweeney's performance feeling very unformed. Unfortunately, if Sydney Sweeney had a better mainstream reputation right now, and if the movie had stronger press, I do think a lot of people would find it compelling. This is a harrowing story of a woman escaping her abuser, masquerading as a sports biopic, and I do think that's genuinely interesting. But this is definitely not Sydney Sweeney's Charlize Theron in Monster moment. As long as Sweeney lets her reputation as a performer and a spokesperson sour, Christy will never get the look that it probably deserves.
So, we arrive at the most uncomfortable question. Was this a fair price to pay? To what degree is an individual actor responsible for the system that empowers them? Sydney Sweeney did not create white supremacy, but she unquestionably accepted its benefits without, it seems, a thought for its costs to others. Her complicity was one of passive acceptance, of never using her platform to question the very machinery that elevated her. In a previous era, that might have been enough. But today, the public, particularly a generation that has been educated on these nuances through social media, demands more. They demand awareness. They demand accountability. They are no longer willing to accept that I was just doing my job defense when that job involves perpetuating harmful, racialized stereotypes, even unintentionally. Her downfall serves as a stark warning to every public figure. Ignorance of your privilege is no longer an excuse. It is a liability.
I'm a journalist, and really quickly I want to vent about the Sydney Sweeney interview. So if you haven't seen, after this whole massive controversy behind the jeans ad that Sydney Sweeney did, which jokingly implies that white people have superior genes, she finally sat down with a journalist, which I was initially so happy about, and the journalist asked her about the controversial ad campaign and what she had to say about it. And the thing that pissed me off wasn't Sydney Sweeney's response, because I'm absolutely not surprised that she just brushed the question off and basically didn't give a fuck about people accusing her of being a white supremacist. The thing that pissed me off was the way that the journalist asked the questions. This journalist was so pandering thing. It phrased the questions in such like a softball way, and literally her facial expressions, the tone, all of it was just like, now, Sydney, let's just talk about the silly little thing that people are accusing you of, and then let's just like get this conversation out of the way, and then we can talk about fun stuff. And that to me is fucking worrying. Part of the point of journalism is to be able to hold power to account. And celebrities are powerful people. It really highlights the issue with the celebrity interview in Hollywood. If you watch any kind of celebrity interview, whether it's on like a press junket, whether it's on the red carpet, they are basically either done by podcasters or interviewers who eventually want to become influencers and celebrities themselves. And that's problematic. These people serve to entertain. They want to make fun content and they want to make the celebrity feel good about themselves. And they're also not trained to ask hard questions that have journalistic integrity. And what that means is that every fucking celebrity interview you watch now is either like Hot Ones or Chicken Shop Date or come to BuzzFeed and play with kittens or puppies. And it's basically meant that celebrities have gotten so comfortable in only doing interviews that make themselves feel good and look good that they literally, it feels like, refuse to sit down with journalists. And I get it. I get that there is, you know, kind of bad blood and this like bad history between celebrities and journalists being rude or invasive, and I get that. But with stuff like this whole Sydney Sweeney drama, it really highlights why it's important for celebrities to talk to real journalists and journalists that are willing to make celebrities uncomfortable. If you get to interview an A-list celebrity who has had some kind of scandal and you, God forbid, make them feel uncomfortable about that scandal, there's like a 99% chance that they will never want to speak to you again, and that they'll go, I would much rather go to BuzzFeed and play with kittens than speak to a journalist who's going to make me feel uneasy. And then bear with me, the wider consequence of all of this is that right now we're basically in an era where the only way you can hold a celebrity accountable isn't through them doing like a tough interview with a journalist. It's basically through cancelling them publicly, which feels mean and it feels like a real last resort that we shouldn't have to go to. So I think that we need to bring back good journalistic celebrity interviews sooner rather than later.
The saga of Sydney Sweeney is a brutal modern parable. It's about the collision between unexamined privilege and a newly empowered public conscience. It reveals that in the 21st century, a career can be destroyed not by a lack of talent, but by a failure of cultural literacy. So here's the challenge. Look at your own field, your own life. What are the unspoken systems you benefit from? Is it your race, your gender, your educational background, your network? This isn't about cultivating guilt. It's about cultivating awareness. Use that awareness to question the scripts you're given, the deals you make, the platforms you stand on. True power isn't just enjoying the benefits of the system. It's understanding how it works well enough to change it for the better, so that the next downfall isn't just a spectacle, but a step toward a more just industry and a more just world.